Traders, how are you? Marcello, founder of the Day Trading Academy. Today we're doing the recap of what happened in the markets last week. Overall, we had an amazing week. The market made all-time highs, three major indices, stock indices in the United States, all-time highs on Monday, all-time highs on Friday, and we're on course now for the best year since 2013 with gains of about 20+%. On Friday, of about 446 of the 500 companies in the S&P have reported their results so far, their financial reports from the third trimester, the third quarter in the year. If you guys don't know, if you guys are a little bit new, because I saw some of the questions last week, they report their financial statements, their profit, everything, whether to see if they beat or fail estimates three times in the year, and then at the beginning of next year, they report the full year results. So you guys know. Of all those that have reported, about 3/4 of those have beaten profit estimates. Overall, this week we had a situation where there was very good news, supposedly, about a potential partial trade deal between the United States and China. Obviously, if the two largest economies in the world that account for a vast percentage of the global economy are at war with each other economically, putting taxes and all kinds of limitations on their products going back and forth, that's definitely going to affect the global economy. So now with some kind of hope, a light, let's say, at the end of the tunnel, that definitely has brought up higher spirits, and that's why the market's just literally rallied quite a bit. The Dow 1.22% positive, the S&P 500 went up 0.85%, and the NASDAQ 1.06%. I don't know if you guys remember, I believe it was March of last year, right around there. I think we had the big drop in December. Yeah, I think it was sometime in the middle of last year. I told you guys, well, the markets may be going up, but not as much as before. You guys can see, even though we're making record highs every week, it's 0.1, 0.8, 1 point and change. So we're not really getting these big moves anymore like we had before. Overseas market news, the Europeans' main markets reached a 21-month high. Asian markets will race to their highest level in the last 6 months. And the MSCI All Country Index, which basically gathers the stock exchange of a lot of major countries around the world, their stock indexes, right? They track those, and that index is about 1.5% shy of the record peak as well, after advancing a 9th day out of the last 10 on Tuesday. Don't forget, if you guys have questions, hashtag Ask Marcello. Don't forget to subscribe here to the channel, or maybe Instagram if you guys are watching on there. Marcello Arrambide English is my English Instagram. And also, if you guys are listening, you can listen to the podcast rather than watch on video. Just search for Day Trading Academy on Spotify or iTunes, or go to the website daytradingacademy.com. On the blog, you can download the sound directly, so you guys can do that as well. Other than that, Latin American markets are mostly higher as well. The Bovespa, one of the biggest winners, at 1.13%. They're at a record high. That's what happened this week on the Bovespa, even though it's not a huge gain this week. Overall for the year, that 25% in 2019 for this year. And European markets mostly higher as well. The good news from the trade spat, let's call it, between China and the United States is helping the European markets as well. Italy was the biggest winner, 2.62%. Istanbul, another big winner at 4.76%. Latin American markets are mostly higher. The Argentina Merval was at negative 4.72%, the biggest loser. That was one of the most overextended, let's say, biggers and losers. African and Middle Eastern markets, Egypt is up 1.63%. Asia and Australian markets are mostly higher as well, with Thailand at 2.82%, with the Philippines exchange up 1.12%. Shout out to all the new traders in the Philippines. The EU drafted a new document, according to Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, that the ECB, the European Central Bank, should consider issuing a public digital currency. I don't know if you guys remember the video that I did, but I talked about how this was one of the expectations. The question is, whether you're a Bitcoin fan or not, what's going to happen to the value of Bitcoin and other digital currencies if, let's say, countries like Europe, obviously, Europe as a whole, right? We know there are a lot of different countries. The United States, China, Japan, they all band together and say, well, we're going to start issuing digital currency. What's going to happen to the value of Bitcoin if people just don't use it anymore? Could it still exist? Yeah, it might go up and down, and you can maybe trade a little bit if you don't get your money stolen, because there's been a lot of theft with the exchanges. But that's one of the things that essentially may happen that I talked about in that video about 2 years ago that we should watch out for. Notice now we're starting to see that. There's the plan by Facebook to launch the Libra is what kind of launched this situation where they got a really hostile response from the global regulators, and they fiercely wanted to ban it, especially France and Germany, if you guys remember. So now they're going to start their own and join the club. So remember, I always say there's two parts of Bitcoin, right? You have blockchain and Bitcoin. So blockchain is the technology. Bitcoin is what uses the cryptocurrency that uses blockchain. A lot of people talk about how they're together, but they're really two separate things. You can see how governments, real estate transactions, all kinds of things can literally take advantage of blockchain technology. Other than that, Bitcoin is lower for the week, negative 3.81% to 8,811.66. But don't worry, guys. This is the year that it's going to get to 50,000. Don't worry. This is definitely the year. If you guys are listening on the podcast, that is sarcasm. After the surge of last week, even though Bitcoin went down this week, almost 4%, it did have a surge last week of about 22.83%. In financial and banking news, Christine Lagarde as the new incoming ECB president, European Central Bank. Remember, one of her quotes, she said, "We should be happier to have a job than to have our savings protected." This is in criticism of both Germany and the Netherlands that have their budget in order. Germany is actually one of the only countries in the world that's actually lowering its federal debt. Lagarde, which came from the IMF, is favoring, based on what the IMF wants as well, they favor currency debasement in exchange for growth. So basically what the expectation is once she starts, we can expect to have a lot more euros in the market, and she most likely will go after individual markets, individual countries that don't fall into compliance, like Germany, for example. Chinese central bank on Tuesday trimmed its key interest rate for the first time since it was introduced 3 years ago, 5 basis points to about 3.25%. It might lead the way for more policy action as China tries to protect its slowing economy. In commodities, crude oil futures went up 0.47% to 57.24. International petroleum is the Spanish word. I'm saying in English. I always thinking that always happens to me now. I think it's Spanish and I try to say a Spanish word in English. International crude, which is called Brent, went up 1.61% to 62.51. Saudi Aramco is the state company of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, produces 10% of the world's crude output. It's the world's most profitable firm. It made $111 billion in net income in 2018. The shares of the state-owned oil giant are set to be trading publicly. They want to get rid of about 1 to 2% of its shares on the Saudi Arabia exchange, raising between 20 to 40 billion, even though the Saudi Arabia insists it's worth about $2 trillion. There's even a slew of Chinese state-owned entities that are looking to invest anywhere between $5 to $10 billion. UK suddenly ordered a total freeze on fracking operations on Saturday, even though the current government, Johnson, was in favor of it. So they're citing public safety after a series of tremors, and the ban is going to stay in place indefinitely. Other than that, Saudi Arabia, due to its IPO, it is the largest producer and the leading voice in OPEC. The oil mafia is what I call it. They are trying to pressure other members in the oil cartel to slash output to help Aramco's IPO set for next month. India, if you guys don't know India, they have a love relationship with gold. They have a huge cache of about $1 trillion in gold, but it's in individual homes. Even when women get married, for example, the family of the female has to give a huge present to the male. This is several more times the amount that was supposedly held by the U.S. government in Fort Knox. I say supposedly because there's some rumors that they don't have any more gold. They just say they have it, but they really don't, and it technically hasn't been verified either. If the Indian government is trying to monetize that gold because they want to use that money to be able to put into the economy, and if they're able to monetize about 1/3 of that, it could add as much as 2% to the GDP growth rate, even though what they're trying to do is the government is trying to allow India to get to a $5 trillion economy by 2025. Gold and silver on pace for its biggest weekly declines since 2017 as global recession and U.S. Recession fears fade. This was good news for me. It finally came down. I've been waiting for it to be able to go ahead and enter some of those silver positions. As I mentioned to you guys before, I haven't forgot the video, by the way. I remember you guys wanted me to do that video. There's also an increasing likelihood of at least a partial trade deal, which I mentioned in the beginning as well, between the two largest economies, China and the U.S. Precious metals overall down for the week. Gold negative 4.48% to 1,450. Silver down 7.77% at about 1687. Palladium is now the most precious of the precious metals. It got to an all-time high of 1,833 last week. In political news, the president of Chile, Piñera, rejects the idea of resigning, even though he's had a ton of problems in his country with the riots and all the protests that he's had. He says that he is intending to finish his 2-year term. In economic news, Hong Kong manufacturing data continues to plunge. 5 months of protests have definitely hurt the economy now that they're in their first official recession since the last financial crisis. IHS Markit says that the rate of decline in business activity is the fastest since the survey began over 21 years ago, meaning that the rate at which is declining is the fastest rate at which is declining in the last 21 years. In corporate news, McDonald's announcing the ousting of their CEO, Steve Easterbrook, for having the fancy hanky-panky with an employee, which is not permitted by the company. Chris Kempczynski, which is obviously Polish or some kind of Eastern European name with that last name, who previously ran the U.S. business, is going to replace him. Easterbrook did do a good job by reviving all-day breakfast options and also charging into online delivery and ordering. Uber shares are down 6% after they reported another mega loss of $1.2 billion in quarter 3 of this year. They are expecting profitability by 2021 as they try to improve, try to improve global scale and efficiency with tech and automations, because I don't believe they're going to be very successful when there's a recession on the way. And shares are down over 25% in 2019. In trade news, Thailand is announcing a absolutely massive Asia-Pacific Trade Pact in 2020 at the 35th ASEAN Summit. They're making a trade deal that's going to cover 1/3 of the globe's GDP. This is absolutely massive. It involves all of 10 of the 10 Southeast Asian nations and their 6 largest trading partners, which is China, Japan, South Korea, India, Australia, and New Zealand. India suddenly pulled out at the end due to the fact, I think it's because of China, but they said it's because of their farmers, businesses, workers, and consumers are going to be hurt if they entered the deal. China's Commerce Ministry is saying that the China and U.S. have agreed to cancel phases of tariffs imposed, but Trump has not officially agreed to the deal. And in the interim, U.S.-China trade deal is expected to scrap the $156 billion in tariffs that are expected to be placed on Chinese goods on the 15th of December. In technology, China is now launching commercial services for their super fast 5G mobile networks. There now has, the government has placed 37 experts from various universities and institutes to research 6G. 5G is 10 times faster than 4G, but they have no idea what 6G is going to look like. In investment news, SoftBank's first operating loss in 14 years at negative almost $6.5 billion in quarter 3. And I lost my place here. Give me 1 second. I'll find it again. They did lose a chunk of money. If you guys don't know who SoftBank is, well, I found my place here. SoftBank is the main shareholder and now controlling shareholder of WeWork, which, if you guys remember, they had the quote-unquote huge IPO of $47 billion, and now it's only valued $7.8 billion, which took a massive hit to SoftBank. Now this is starting to put a spotlight on the founder, Masayoshi-son, on his, you guys like my Japanese? Masayoshi-son. They're starting to put a spotlight on his risky investing techniques, which he puts so much money into these cash-burning startups which don't make any money. Now, supposedly, they're going to make money in the future. The U.S. FCC is formalizing their approval for the merger of T-Mobile and Sprint. The commission found that the transaction is going to help close the digital divide, advance U.S. leadership in 5G, and lead in the next generation of wireless connectivity. Jersey residents voted to overwhelmingly in favor of new stricter regulations against Airbnb. It spent $4.2 million to try to lobby the vote to be able to go against it, Airbnb that is. And now Airbnb management is afraid that they're going to have to leave the market altogether. And this is a problem because obviously this is a market for them, a good market, the US, part of the US market, as it prepares to go public. Xerox is considering a bold takeover of HP and a cash and stock offer. Xerox, which is 3 times smaller than HP, is still offering to buy them at about, the market cap is about $27 billion, so they're definitely going to need more financing to be able to get that done. They just announced that it's selling its stake in the 57-year-old joint venture with Fujifilm. And with that news, the HP shares went up 15%. In international events, EU remains committed to the 2015 Iran nuclear deal, even though the United States withdrew from that, specifically President Trump. They are insisting on full compliance, even though it collapsed after the U.S. withdrawal. And Iran began injecting uranium gas into centrifuges at a plant, going much higher than what was permitted in the original deal. And this new international crisis is going to be inevitable. Mexican government killed 9 members of a U.S. Mormon family in Mexico, mainly children. Unfortunately, it's the latest massacre in Mexico with all the problems that they have with the drug wars and the drug cartels. If you guys remember, the city that literally went on lockdown after the U.S. government went to war against a local gang drug cartel in Culiacan. We actually have some traitors out there. A mine worker was shot in Islamic terrorist ambush of 3 buses in Burkina Faso. If you guys don't know where that is, it's in Africa. It's a very small country, but it is in Africa. 1 of 3 survivors from a bus had about 80 people on board, and likely the death toll is higher than what they report. Microsoft Japan has seen an almost 40% jump in productivity levels for its workforce. They experimented with a 4-day work week. This past August, they gave everybody Friday's paid leave. 92% of the employees said they were happy with the program by the end of its run. They printed almost 60% fewer pages, used 23.1% less electricity, and they're also planning to do a similar experiment at this winter. What about you guys? Would you guys work a little bit harder to be able to have? I feel like it would be a boost in the beginning, but then everybody would kind of work the same over time, right? The productivity probably now is because everybody wants that 4-hour work week, so they obviously saw, they wanted to work harder, but I think it might balance out over time. Twitter fell 2.5% in the pre-market after the U.S. Department of Justice charged 2 former employees spying for Saudi Arabia. The U.S. state of California has revealed for the first time an 18-month legal probe into Facebook's privacy practices, but they are saying that the company is now stonewalling the investigation due to the fact that they haven't handed over Facebook CEO's Mark Zuckerberg's emails yet. And this is important. Number of California retirees collecting a public pension of $100,000 or more last year hit an all-time high of 79,235 last year, up 85% since 2013. Payouts of at least $100,000 accounted for 20% of the $51.7 billion total payments made in 2018 alone. This is an all-time high, and as the rate of the pension increases, this is absolutely unsustainable. And this is what happens, right? We have some places, and remember, I always like to remind this to you guys, I don't want to get political, whether you're left or right, Obama, Trump, lover, hater, whatever, it doesn't matter. At the end of the day, facts are facts. And California is one of those countries where their finances are in absolute chaos. Chicago is another example. So what's going to happen in this scenario is it's completely unsustainable. Eventually they're going to go bankrupt and the U.S. government is going to bail them out. Well, what's going to happen? People like you from Texas or New York or Florida or Oregon, Montana, wherever, we're the ones that are going to have to bail them out. When at the end of the day, they're creating this mess, you guys that are in California should have to fix it, right? So this definitely, even though it's happening in California, is a problem that's affecting a lot of other states, and it's going to affect us overall due to the fact that we're up to our necks in debt, federal debt, state debt, personal debt, city debt, and even these kinds of pensions, for example, which are literally out of control. Shares in companies controlled by billionaires. There was a study done over the past 15 years that studied over 603 public firms in 47 countries that found when a billionaire has considerable influence in a company or most of their wealth is tied to the company, the results showed are much better than normal companies. It's about 18% results. for the companies that had that connection instead of 9% overall. And the world's richest people became far less well off last year. Their wealth fell by 4.3% globally to $8.5 trillion in 2018, according to a report by UBS and PwC. UBS is a bank, PwC is an accounting firm. Geopolitical turmoil and volatile equity markets were one of the big triggers of this, even though this is the first time that the wealth of billionaires went down for the first time since 2015. That's for the week. That's the news for the week, guys. Let me know if you guys have any questions. Don't forget we have the podcast. See you next week.